Hi everybody, this is Dave Dugdale, learningdslrvideo.com, and today I'm excited to have Mark Wallace on my show today. Mark and his wife Diane run a photo studio called SnapFactory in Phoenix, Arizona. AdoramaTV, or Adorama, is one of his clients, which he produces kind of educational videos for. And if you haven't seen them, they're just awesome. You should definitely check them out. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really like, one of the things I want to say really fast before we start is I really admire what you're doing on your site. I love that you're in search of knowledge and that you've taken it to the next level where you're actually just sort of sharing everything that you're learning as you learn, which I have never seen anybody do that. So that is awesome. So thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun sharing all the knowledge that I have with everybody. And it's amazing, as I share, I'm getting a lot back in return. All the comments that I have, people are just been awesome. I'll ask a question and people are like, well, do it this way, try it that way. And it's just been fantastic. So Mark, how did you get started in photography? And, how did you start? Are you shooting any video with your DSLRs these days?
So let me break that into two answers. One, I got started in photography. I grew up around a dad that took snapshots all the time. We traveled a lot. But really my sister, I have three sisters. My middle sister, Dawn, she was a very advanced amateur photographer. And so I would see some of the things that she would shoot and it really inspired me. So I picked up a camera in the mid-1980s. Professionally, really, I started shooting in the early, actually the late 80s, about 1988. But mainly it wasn't for the sake of photography, it was for the sake of theater. And so I have a theater background. And so I was trying to produce some shows and we had a limited cast and I needed to add some elements to that for plot reasons. And so I'd seen a show that the Air Force had done actually with a bunch of old carousels and slides and thought, well, I could do it. And I won't tell the story, but somehow I wound up with some Kodak projectors and dissolve units and stands and registration slides and rear screens and all that. And so that's really my intro into professional photography, was shooting for shows that were going to be shown on a stage. And then I was a producer and I traveled quite a bit for years and did a lot of theater and live shows. And then around the late 90s and 2000, when digital came around, I started shooting stills. I got my first digital camera, I think in 1999 or maybe 2000. And that just was an eye-opener for me. So I shot hundreds of pictures at that time, which I thought was a lot of photos, per month, and upgraded pretty quickly to a Canon 10D and then never looked back. So I sort of switched from live production events and traveling and settled down and started shooting stills. And then video, actually, I shot a lot of video for the live shows. So we did lots of live video. We did broadcast kind of stuff. We did DVDs, things like that. So it was all high-end professional video stuff. And so I was listening to NPR. I'm an NPR junkie and heard about something called YouTube. And at the time, I was thinking of making some studio lighting tutorials, and I was going to make it into a DVD and sell that. And the first attempt, the equipment I had wasn't quite up to snuff. And so I found that it was great for online viewers, but not so good for DVD. And so that's where Digital Photography 101 actually was born, was my attempts to make a training DVD. And right around that same time, I hooked up with a couple guys who run StudioLighting.net. And so Bill and Ed said, hey, if you want to make some DVDs about studio lighting, we'll put them on our site. And so we did. And that was sort of the birth of the Mark Wallace, as you know, on YouTube. And so that's the short answer of how I got started with shooting stills and shooting video.
Yeah, I got started on YouTube about 4 years ago, and I've been doing mostly like solar videos. And then just recently I started working on this particular website, Learning DSLR Video, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's just amazing the audience you can get on YouTube. It's just fantastic compared to, I also publish to Vimeo as well, and the audience is really sophisticated there, but YouTube is just, for getting the numbers, is just incredible. So my next question is, I've got some studio lights that I'm using, and they're pretty cheap. I just use halogen lights that I'm shooting through some nylon fabric. And do you have any recommendations on a softbox? Because I'd like to, take it up a notch, and I'd like to get some softboxes that are easy to assemble, because I know they can be kind of hard where you put those rods in or whatever, and that, don't cost an arm and a leg, that kind of work well for an amateur like myself.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are a couple things that video bring with it, and one is the gear is really expensive. So almost everything costs an arm and a leg, unfortunately. And the reasons for that is, when you're using lights that are continuously on that don't cost a lot, they're really hot. The temperature is actually hot, and if you get a softbox that's not rated for those temperatures, it'll catch fire and burn your house down. So you don't want that. So to make that heat resistant material, it's just not inexpensive. So what I'd suggest is, instead of using a softbox, maybe look at the Lowell lights, and they have kits that you can get that are for studio kind of interview setups. They have lights that can light large spaces, and they have some diffusion material that you can actually put on a frame, and so you still get some soft light, but it's you don't need necessarily a softbox to get that. And those kits are pretty inexpensive. So they have kits that are a couple lights that I believe are around $600 up to about $1,000, which for a video kit is just a really smoking deal. And so those are Lowell lights. The lights that we used when we wanted to really get to the next level of quality, we bought some ARRI lights. Those are dramatically more expensive. For, I think, a 4-light kit, you're looking in the vicinity of about $3,500. But that includes a case, the lights, a softbox, 3 Fresnels. So that's what I would suggest if you're going to be doing this stuff, professionally, is look at the ARRI lights. And then the other lights that we've used that don't require a softbox are the ARRI Studio Cools. And so that's actually what we're using right now. They're just big, soft lights, and they're like fluorescent lights. They're cool. You can change the color temperature on them without gel, because you can get different lamps to replace, so you can do 55K or 32K. And then there are also Kino Flows, which are even more expensive. So if you're starting out, look at the Lowell lights. If you really want something that's going to be versatile, then I'd go with the ARRI Studio Cools or Kino Flows.
So what type of camera are you using to shoot your episodes of AdoramaTV with?
We use, I think it's behind me here, it's a Panasonic, it's an AG HPX 170, and so it's a full HD 720p camera, and it's got some features that we really looked for. So we looked at cameras for a few months before we made a decision on what to buy, and the Panasonics are great for a bunch of reasons.
After I watched your video on digital calibration, I bought one of these from AdoramaTV, which has a white, gray, and a black strip on it. And it's worked quite well, but in terms of getting the exposure right. But in terms of getting the contrast, when I go into my nonlinear editor and I click on the black button, or the eyedropper tool, and the gray and the white, it tends to make the contrast too contrasty. And I was wondering, in your example that you used on your site, you used I think it was a tree or something like that. And it seemed like it came out, the contrast came out really well. Do you have any tricks or tips on using these digital calibration targets for kind of getting a good contrast?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing it, you have the right thought in mind. The difference to keep in mind with video over stills is when you're adjusting the contrast in a still photo, it's one photo. And so you can really dial it in and get it perfect. It's just one frame. With video, depending on what you're shooting, if you're moving the camera specifically, your light is changing constantly. And so what is great contrast maybe in frame 1 is going to be shifted in frame 8 or 10 or whatever, because your camera's moved, and therefore the exposure of the frame has changed as well. And so that's really where applications, you really need to get in and do some either post-production work in something like color. Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere both have some changes that you can go in and make changes to things like levels or even curves, but it applies that same curve or level through the entire video, and really that's not the best way to do it, because, as I said before, your subjects are changing you know, as you're moving your camera. Now, if it's a still shot like we're doing right now, the light's not changing, the camera's not moving, you can get away with that. But one of the things that's probably better to do is to actually go in to your filters, you know, if you're using levels or curves or color or some, you know, whatever post-production work you're doing, and you really need to start keyframing that stuff. So you're setting exposures and contrast specific to the light at the exact time that your exposure is made. So you sort of have to manually write all that stuff. So as you're changing things, you have to go in and make those adjustments in real time or keyframe those. And so that's something that's not very simple and it's very time consuming. But the best resource, I would say, for learning how to do that, there's a site called lynda.com, L-Y-N-D-A, lynda.com. And they've got some amazing training for editing videos in post-production and really learning how to do some more of the advanced stuff in After Effects or color or, you know, those types of things. And then there's another guy that I really enjoy his training. His name is Chad Perkins, and he's got a website. I think it's called the Chad and Todd Cast. I'm not sure. I'll send you the link. But Chad's got some amazing training as well for learning how to do that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as a still photo where you just set them and you're done. You have to sort of set as you go because video, you know, it changes with time.
I'm kind of curious, do you use a digital calibration target when you're setting up, when you do AdoramaTV, or are you just, well, I know exactly what it was last time, so I'm just going to set all of
Well, we use a waveform monitor. So that's something, it's a tool that, that's one of the things that really sets apart a DSLR from a camera like a Panasonic or a VariCam or a more traditional professional camera is the waveform monitor. A waveform monitor is the best thing for setting your exposure and understanding where things are falling in and out of the dynamic range of your camera. So unfortunately, DSLRs don't have waveform monitors, so you can't do that. So that's how we do it. We use waveform monitors and some other vector scopes and things to check color and to make sure things are right. And then we use an X-Rite color checker if we really need to make sure that color is correct. We've got color bars and things like that. So those are all things that aren't available on a DSLR for checking contrast and color. You can get some of those features though by using Adobe's On Location. I'm not sure that you could do that with the DSLR because I don't know, depending on the model, if it has a USB out or a FireWire out so you can actually monitor video real time, because that's what's required to get those video scopes. But that's how most production houses will correct contrast and colors, by using a vector scope for color and a waveform monitor for their exposure.
This might be a good time to ask, I'm kind of curious, why don't you use a DSLR on your videos that you do on YouTube for Adorama and your own channel?
There are a bunch of really good reasons. Number one, the audio on a DSLR is a challenge. So anytime, and we did some interviews, we shot some how they do that. It's Michael Koshiros in San Francisco and Tamar in Hollywood. We just shot some of those, and we used a Canon 7D to shoot those. So we have used DSLRs, and on both of those we had issues. One was we had to carry an external audio capture device, so we can use like lavalier mics and things like that with balanced inputs to make sure that we get that audio. So we were recording audio totally separate from video, which isn't uncommon actually. That's how all film shooters do that. When you're making a movie, you record those separately and sync them in post. We just don't like having to take that time. So audio is an issue for us. The second thing is the compression rate. So our cameras are DVC Pro HD. And so they're file-based, so we take them right out of the camera. We put them into a high-speed card reader. They go right into Final Cut Pro. We can edit immediately. With H.264 encoding, which is what most video cameras will compress video to, the quality is lower, so you're basically taking a compressed video, changing the codec so you can actually edit in your nonlinear editing suite. Or with the case of Final Cut, there are some plugins that allow you to do real-time editing in H.264, but when you transcode again to get it out to the video world or a DVD, you're actually compressing an already compressed video, so we don't really like that. We like to have real progressive frames that we can edit in real time. So those two things. And then lastly, we have things like vector scopes, waveform monitors, the ability to record 4 tracks of audio so you can get ambient sound plus sound from actors. So you can't do that with the DSLR unless you have an external audio capture device. The ability to hook up things like rails, matte boxes, you know, all the accessories that are available for pro cameras. Those are available for DSLRs, but you just don't have the same options. You know, so the list goes on and on. So if I was shooting short films, maybe some like true independent films where the takes were much shorter, then I would go ahead and use a DSLR because you get that shallow depth of field. But for interviews, usually those interviews will go on for a half an hour or so, and so you have to stop and start and stop and start because you have about a 10 or 12 minute sort of timeline on what you can record. That's about the buffer on a DSLR. And so it becomes really painful because as you're talking with a client or as you're going through an interview, you have to stop everything and restart, and you lose your train of thought, and sometimes the camera cuts out in the middle of what somebody's saying. So it's just not the kind of workflow that we want. In the long run, it takes longer to create a video using a DSLR than it does using a Panasonic like this one or another traditional pro video camera.
So I'm quickly learning how important fast glass is when shooting with my Canon T2i. I'm kind of looking for another Canon lens, a wider lens than, you know, my widest I've got right now is a 28mm zoom, it goes to 135. So I'm looking for something below that that's also fast, that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Is there anything out there like that?
Well, I'm sure there is somewhere. I just don't know of it. Unfortunately, asking for really fast glass that doesn't cost much, and I get that, you know, people send hundreds of emails a day asking me questions from from the YouTube show, and that's the question, you know, I want fill in the blank, this, but I don't want it to cost very much. And that's sort of like saying, you know, I want a race car that can compete in Formula One, but I only have $1,000. You know, where can I buy that car? You can't. And so I'm not saying there's not a lens that is wider than 28 that's fast, that doesn't cost a lot. I just don't know of one. And the reason that it costs a lot is because when you're competing with things like chromatic aberration and you really need to get that fixed aperture that's really wide when you're zooming in and out, that the mechanics of doing that, it's really difficult. And so the production costs are really high, and that's going to be passed along to you. So the lens that I do use and I love as far as a wide angle lens, it does cost an arm and a leg. It's 16 to 35 2.8. It's a lens that I saw James Noctway was using, and I thought if he uses it, it has to be amazing. And so I bought it, and I think I got it used for about $1,200, so it's not an inexpensive lens. But as far as wide angle lenses go, it is just amazing. And I did some comparisons. I had a friend that had and I think it was an f4 lens that was a similar focal length, and just side by side we shot, and the results we were getting out of the 16 to 35 2.8 were just leaps and bounds above the clarity that he was getting on his lens. And his was an L lens. In Canon parlance, that's an expensive lens. So just because it's expensive doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get great results. But the 16 to 35 2.8 is the wide angle lens that I've used, and I think it's the best wide angle lens that I've seen for a Canon.
Well, Mark, thanks for coming on the show. And can you tell my visitors or my viewers where they can find more about you? And I understand that you have a new DVD out. Can you tell people where they can find that as well?
Sure. I mean, SnapFactory.com is really where all of our worlds collide. That's where my work and Diane's work. The DVD is actually at StudioLightingEssentials.com. You can buy it there, or you can see my work at MarkWallacePhotography.com. And then the videos on YouTube, most of those can be found at our channel. It's youtube.com/SnapFactory. And so we have, I think, 170 videos, something like that. So it's everything from studio lighting, video stuff, product reviews, all kinds of neat stuff out there. And so AdoramaTV also has a lot of videos. But to see all of them, you have to go to our SnapFactory channel. We have hidden gems out there. AdoramaTV is only the videos we create for Adorama. And then I'm on Facebook as well. Facebook and Twitter. Just go to our SnapFactory page and you'll see where you can get me on both of those.
Well, that's all the time we've got for today. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll talk to you later.